So, welcome students. Today we will start with NCRT exemplar of chapter 15, that is body fluids and circulation. So this is disclaimer. So this will be our learning objectives. So this chapter is all about how our body transports essential materials like oxygen, nutrients and waste products. So we will use the NCRT exemplar to guide us through the key concepts of this chapter. So this is the index. First 10 questions will be MCQs. Then next 4 questions will be very short answer type question. Then next 8 questions will be very short answer type question. And next 9 question will be long answer type question. So there are total 31 questions. And we will try to cover these questions in this section. So this is the first question of NCRT exemplar, which is MCQ. So the question is, which of the following cells do not exhibit phagocytosis? So this question asks about which of the following cells do not show phagocytotic activity. Okay, so remember what phagocytosis is. It's like the body's cleanup crew. It kills or cleans certain cells and eat up unwanted particles, much like Pac-Man gobbling up dots. So take a moment to look into the options. So the answer is basophil. How? Because talking about basophil, these are the least common type of granulocytes. Like it make up only about around 0.1% to 0.3% of the WBCs in our circulation. So think of them as a rare specialist in our immune system, not the main workforce. What they are Where they are involved, they are mainly involved in certain inflammatory reactions, especially those that cause allergies. So unlike some other white WBCs, they don't act like cellular vacuum cleaners. They don't engulf or digest foreign particles, so they don't show phagocytotic activities. So our option C is correct. But in contrast, in contrast we talk if we talk about monocytes, they are like the body's patrol officers. So they leave the bloodstream, enter tissues and become macrophages, specialized cells that eat up invaders. For example, in the liver, these become Kuffler cells. So neutrophils also acts body's first responders, targeting bacteria and fungi. Macrophages, which is developed from monocytes, are classic examples of phagocytotic cells. So they act like the body's cleanup crew, engulfing and digesting pathogens and debris to keep tissues healthy. To sum up, basophils are unique among these cells because they don't perform phagocytosis. Instead, they play a key role in allergic reaction. Okay, allergic responses. So remember, understanding the different roles of RBCs help us appreciate how our immune system works together to protect us. So this is question number 2 of MCQ, and the question is, which of one of the following symptom observed in people infected with dengue fever? We have already talked about it. The prominent symptom of dengue fever is decrease or significant decrease in platelet count. So here option C is correct. So let's talk about the answer in detail. So, dengue fever, which is a common viral disease in tropical areas, it is characterized by a decrease or significant decrease in platelet count. Okay, so when someone has dengue, their platelet count drops significantly, which can lead to life threatening situations, because platelets are like the body's emergency repair system for blood vessels. So without enough platelets, even small injuries can cause dangerous bleeding. Think of platelets as band-aids of our blood system or bloodstream. So, this drop in platelet count is actually one of the most common and noticeable symptoms in dengue patients. So, doctor often monitor blood platelet levels closely to track the severity of this disease. So, if you ever hear about someone with dengue, checking their platelet count is likely a part of its care. It's also important to remember that the other options in the question are not symptoms of dengue fever. This helps us eliminate wrong answers in MCQ. So you have to keep in your mind, you can uh, eliminate the wrong answers which are not related to the question, and this is how you can choose the correct answer. So, to sum up, the main takeaway here is that a significant decrease in platelet count is a hallmark of dengue fever. That's why our option C is correct, which is significant decrease in platelet count. So, this is question number third. So, this question is, which among the following is correct during each cardiac cycle? So, this is about cardiac cycle. So, let's see the option. Option A, the volume of blood pumped out by right and left ventricles is same. Option B is the volume of blood pumped by right and left ventricles is different. Option C is the volume of blood received by each atrium is different. And option D is the volume of blood received by aorta and pulmonary artery is different. Let's see the answer. So, think of it as if we talk about cardiac cycle, think of it as a one complete heartbeat, which includes both the contraction as well as the relaxation of the heart muscle. So, it's like the pump that goes through a full squeeze and release to keep blood moving throughout the body. So the contraction phase is called as systole. We have already talked about it. Contraction is systole and relaxation is diastole. So this is what written here. The contraction phase is called the systole, while the relaxation phase is here called the diastole. So the main purpose of the cardiac cycle is to pump blood efficiently to all parts of the body, and this ensures that oxygen and nutrients reaches our tissues and waste product are carried away. So think of your heart as a delivery truck making regular trips to keep every cell supplied. So focusing on right ventricle, it pumps deoxygenated blood to the lungs through the pulmonary artery. This is like sending used up air to the lungs for a fresh supply of oxygen, so the blood can return to the heart ready to nourish the body again. So we will continue with the answer. So talking about what happens after blood gets deoxygenated after blood gets oxygenated in the lungs, the pulmonary vein carries this oxygen rich blood to the left side of the heart, specifically to the left atrium and then left ventricle. So from there the heart ventricle acts like a powerful pump, sending this blood out through the aorta to supply the entire body with oxygen and nutrients, just like delivery truck making its rounds. So and notice how the amount of blood pumped by the left and right ventricles is about the same in each cycle. So if one side pumped more than the other, it would be like having two-lane road where one lane moves much faster eventually, and there would be a traffic jam or backup. So in the heart, this mismatch can lead to serious problems like heart failure. So balance is crucial. So based on this explanation, all other options are in the question are incorrect. So it's very important to understand why only this sequence of events is correct, as it helps us to see how precisely the heart must function to keep us healthy. So this is question number 4, and question is about cardiac activity. So the question is, cardiac activity could be moderated by autonomous neural system. Take the correct answer. So this question is again like third question. It is about cardiac activity. So let's see the answer. So neural signals, especially through the sympathetic nerves, can increase how the fast the heart beats and how strongly it contracts. So think of sympathetic system like pressing the gas pedal in the air, as it makes the heart work even harder and faster, and boosts the amount of blood pumped out. So here option the sympathetic system stimulates heartbeat, heart rate, and stroke volume is correct, because sympathetic system is really is important for contraction. So as a result of contraction, the output will also increase, and eventually the heart rate will increase. So the option B, that is the sympathetic system stimulates heart rate and stroke volume is correct. Talking in details, the sympathetic system is directly responsible for stimulating both the heart rate and the stroke volume. Why? If it helps the heartbeat faster and push out more blood with each beat. So this is especially important during times when your body needs more oxygen, like when you are running or scared. So because of this, the other options in the questions are incorrect. So only the sympathetic system has this stimulating effect on heart. Now look at this diagram. It shows how the nervous system regulates the heartbeat. Notice the pathways and how the signals travel to the heart. To sum up, the sympathetic system acts like an accelerator for the heart, increasing both the rate and strength of each beat. Remember, our nervous system is constantly working behind the scenes to keep our heart functioning properly, adjusting as needed for different situations. So, this is question number 5, and the question is about the blood coagulation, which is a process that helps stop bleeding when we get a cut. So note that the question is asking us to identify which pair of substances is essential for this process. So let's look at the answer. The correct option is option B, which is calcium ion and platelet factors. So I've already talked about this. The main ion which is responsible for coagulation of blood is calcium ion, and the factors because in coagulation of blood, series of reactions takes place, and what causes this reaction? These reactions caused by the these reactions are caused by the platelet factor. So the correct option is option number B, that is calcium ions and platelet factors. So so if we talk in detail, when we already noticed that when we get a injury or a cut, certain factors are released right at the site. So think of it as emergency signals that call for help to stop the bleeding. So these signals kick off the whole clotting process. Now let's focus the roles of calcium and platelet factors. So these two act right at the beginning of the clotting process. So you can think of them as the first responders who arrive at the scene to start organizing at the repair work. So first one is, at the site of an injury, the blood plates disintegrate and releases a phospholipid called as platelet factor 3, that is platelet thromboplastin. So you have to keep in your mind that after this injury, like at the site of injury, the platelet disintegrates into fragments and releases a phospholipid, which is named as platelet factor 3. Particularly, its name is platelet thromboplastin. So at the same time, the injured tissues themselves release another important substance, which is called as thromboplastin. We have already talked about this, which is a type of lipoprotein. So both the platelets and the damaged tissue are sending out signals and materials to help from the to form the clot. So these two factors, that is platelet factor and tissue thromboplastin, then combine with calcium ion and certain proteins in the blood plasma together to form an enzyme called as prothrombokinase. So you can think of it as mixing ingredients to bake a cake. Only when you have all the right components does the process move forward. So we will continue the answer. So let's focus on prothrombokinase. So this enzyme acts like a catalyst or a helper in a chemical reaction. So it helps convert prothrombin, which is an active protein in our blood, into its active form, that is called as thrombin. So imagine prothrombinase acts as a switch that turns on the machinery needed for clotting. Next, thrombin comes into play. Thrombin is like a worker that takes inactive fibrinogen, which is floating around in our blood plasma, and changes it to fibrin. So, what is fibrin? Fibrin is the actual thread-like material that will form the mesh or net to trap blood cells. So, thrombin is crucial for making the building blocks of the blood clot. Now let's see what happens with fibrin. The long fibers of fibrin weave together to create a dense network right at the site of the wound. So this network acts like a fishing net, trapping RBCs, or you can say red blood cells, or WBCs and platelets to form a solid clot. So this is why our body naturally stops bleeding and starts healing. It is also important to note that the other options in the questions are incorrect. So only the substances we have discussed, that is prothrombinase, prothrombin, thrombin, fibrinogen, and fibrin, are directly involved in the whole clotting process. And always double check which components are actually essential when answering these types of questions. So remember that each part plays an important role, or special, or we can say specific role, prominent role, just like members of a team working together to stop bleeding. So this is question number 6, and the question is: each ECG depicts the depolarization and repolarization processes during the cardiac cycle. So this question is about ECG, about the waves of ECG, and second, it was asking that in the ECG of normal healthy individual, one of the following waves is not represented. So we have already talked about ECG, PQRST waves. Let's talk about in detail about these. So the correct option here is repolarization, because in ECG we cannot see repolarization of atria in PQRST waves. Okay, let's see the answers in detail. So the P wave shows atrial depolarization. If you remember the ECG, the ECG, particular ECG, then it has PQRST waves, and the P wave particularly shows atrial depolarization, which is when the upper chambers of the heart gets ready to contract. Talking about the second wave, which is QRS complex, it represents ventricular depolarization, or we can say the lower chambers preparing here to contract. Finally, the RT wave shows ventricular repolarization when the lower chambers reset for the next beat. So think of these waves as different checkpoints in the heart's cardiac cycle, or you can say electrical cycle. Therefore, atrial repolarization is not represented in ECG, or you can say electrocardiogram. To sum up, we can say that the ECG is a powerful tool for understanding heart function, but it doesn't show every single event. So, the main takeaway is that atrial repolarization is not represented as a separate wave in a normal ECG. So, let's remember this as we move on to more questions about about heart and circulation. So, this is question number 7, and the question asks which type of cell lacks nucleus in hormones. Okay, and the options are RBCs, neutrophils, eosinophil, and erythrocytes. We have already talked about it, so let's see the answer and discuss it in detail. Of course, the answer is RBCs, or we can say red blood cells. So, RBCs, which are also called as erythrocytes, actually lack a nucleus. So, this is a unique feature compared to most other cells in our body. So, imagine RBCs as delivery trucks that have been stripped down to carry as much as cargo as possible. In this case, the cargo is instead of cargo, it is oxygen. So, why do they don't have nucleus? The absence of a nucleus means that the cell uses less oxygen for its own activity. Okay, so think of it like a delivery truck that doesn't have a big engine or extra compartment, so it doesn't use up goods it's supposed to deliver. So this allows the RBCs to save more oxygen for the rest of the body. So, because RBCs don't have a nucleus, they can transport the maximum amount of oxygen to other cells. It's like having a truck with more space for packages, so it can deliver more in one trip. So, this adaptation is crucial for efficiently supplying our tissues with oxygen as they needed. In contrast, other blood cells like neutrophils, eosinophils, and monocytes don't do have nuclei, and their nuclei come in different shapes and sizes. So these cells have different jobs like fighting infections. So they need their nuclei to function properly. So here's an image that visually compares the different types of RBCs. Here we can see granulocytes, which are eosinophil, basophil, neutrophil. What are granulocytes? Granulocytes are the cells which do have granules in their cytoplasm. Talking about agranulocytes, these are leukocyte and monocytes. They don't have granules in their cytoplasm. And you can also see the structure of platelets, which are in the form of fragments, and erythrocytes, which is in the biconcave form, or in a biconcave shape. Why this is the shape? Because The reason of this shape is the surface area. This shape provides higher surface area, and this will help the RBC to carry more and more oxygen. How? Because it has hemoglobin pigment that can bind to the oxygen, and as much as how hemoglobin pigment is present in the inside the cell, as much as oxygen it can bind up to. So that wraps up our explanation for this question. Remember that the lack of nucleus in RBC is a special adaptation for oxygen transport. So it is important. RBCs are important for transport of oxygen. So this is question number 8 of MCQ, and the question is which one of the following blood cells is involved in antibody production? The options are option A is B lymphocyte, T lymphocyte, RBC, and neutrophils. So here the question is about antibody production. Which one of the cell is are not involved in antibody production? So I've already talked about it, that B lymphocytes are the one which is not involved in antibody production. Let's see the answer in detail. So lymphocytes, talking about lymphocytes are majorly of two types. Lymphocyte is a type of A granulocyte, and it do has two types further, that is B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes. Both B and T lymphocytes are responsible for immune responses, but they do not. But they do this in different ways. It's like having both firefighters and police officers in a city, but they keep us safe, but their methods are completely different. Now let's focus on the answer. So antibodies are like targeted missiles that help our bodies recognize and neutralize invaders like bacteria and viruses. So these B lymphocytes are the stars here. These cells are responsible for making antibodies. Think of B and lymphocyte as factories that produce customized weapons to fight off specific germs or infections. The main job of B lymphocytes is to make antibodies against soluble antigens, which are substances that can create or trigger an immune response. So this process is crucial for what's called as humoral immunity, the immunity that work through the substances found in our body fluids like blood and lymph. So it's important to remember that other blood cells have different roles. Like RBCs or red blood cells carry oxygen. T lymphocytes are more common like commanders in cell-mediated immunity, directing attacks on infected cells. And neutrophils acts like the body's first responders, swallowing up invaders. And each cell type here has its unique job in keeping us healthy. So that wraps up our explanation. That the key takeaway is that the B lymphocytes are the blood cells that are primarily responsible for antibody production. So this is question number 1 of very short answer type. Let's see the question. The question is, name the blood component which is viscous and straw colored filled. So I've already talked about it. Plasma. Okay, what is plasma? Plasma is the liquid part of the blood that looks straw colored and feels a bit sticky or viscous. So you can think of plasma as the river that carries RBCs, nutrients, hormones, waste products throughout the body, just like water in a river carries boats and cargoes. So plasma makes up around 55% of our blood and is essential for transporting many important substances. So let's see the answer in detail. So look at the composition of the blood. Blood is actually a special type of connective tissue. It has a fluid part which is called as plasma, and it contains different types of cells. So imagine plasma as a river that carries all the blood cells throughout our body. Now, focusing on plasma, it's straw colored, viscous fluid that makes up around 55% of our blood. So, most of plasma is water, around 90 to 95, 92%, and the rest is mainly proteins, which make up around 6 to 8% of plasma. So, think of plasma as a watery soup with important ingredients dissolved in it. The main proteins found in plasma are fibrinogen, globulin, and albumin. So each of these has a special job. Like fibrinogen help with blood clotting, globulin fight infections, and albumin help maintain the right balance of fluids in our body. So this is second question, and this is about complete the missing word in the statement given below. We have given five statements and we have to complete them. So let's start with the answer. So first one is plasma without clotting factor is called as serum. If we remove clotting factors from the plasma, then it will be called as serum. So think of plasma as a liquid part of blood, and if you remove the ingredient that help blood clot, what remains is a serum. So the answer is serum. B is neutrophils and monocytes are phagocytotic cells. This means they act like the body. They act like body's cleanup crew, engulfing and digesting harmful invaders like bacteria or fungi or any other viruses. So imagine them as tiny Pac-Man moving through your bloodstream, gobbling up anything that shouldn't be there. Now, talking about C part, eosinophil are associated with allergic reactions. So, these cells do play an important role when body reacts to things like pollen or dust. Okay, so these kind of cells are associated with allergic reactions. The D, we have already discussed about this, that calcium ions play a significant role in clotting. So it acts like a key ingredient in a recipe. Without it, the process of forming a blood clot can't be happen properly. So it's a similar of how it's an ingredient in the process of blood clotting. Without it, blood won't be able to clot. Now, the fifth one, that is E, tells us how you can determine the heartbeat rate by counting the numbers of QRS complexes in an ECG. So the QRS complexes represent the main spike you see on a ECG, which corresponds to the heart ventricles contracting. So by counting these spikes, you can figure out how fast the heart is beating, just like counting the ticks of a clock. So this wraps up our set of questions. Now, this is NCRT question number 3, and the question is uh, given below is the diagrammatic representation of standard ECG and label its different peaks. So this is about ECG, and we have to label the peaks also. So the small upward wave is called the P wave, which shows the atria contracting like the heart starting signal. Next is the larger peak or larger spike, the QRS complex it is, which represents the ventricles contracting. This is the main pump action. Finally, the T wave, which is the last bump, showing the ventricles relaxing and getting ready for the next beat. So remember, each part of the ECG tells us something important about how our heart is functioning. So this is the diagrammatic representation. The main peaks here are P, Q, R, S and T. We've already talked about it. The P wave shows the atria contracting, the QRS represent the ventricles contracting, and the T wave shows the ventricles relaxing. So you can think of these waves as heart waves of sending signals to different chambers to keep the blood flowing smoothly, just like traffic lights guiding cars at an intersection. To sum up, understanding the ECG and its label peaks help us how the heart's electrical system control its pumping action. So remember, each peak tells about how a different about a different part of the heartbeat. This knowledge is essential for diagnosing how heart problems and understanding how circulatory systems do work. Now this is question number 4, and the question is, name the vascular connection that exists between digestive tract and liver. So the answer is hepatic portal system. This is a special network of blood vessels that carries blood rich in nutrients directly from the digestive tract to the liver. So you can imagine it like a delivery route that takes up packages straight from the warehouse, that is the digestive tract, to the main processing center, that is the liver, before they are sent out to the rest of the body. So the answer here, we have already talked about it. The answer here is hepatic portal system. Okay. So hepatic portal system, the unique vascular connection that exists between the digestive tract and the liver. Okay. And it collects nutrient rich deoxygenated blood from the stomach, intestines, pancreas and spleen, and transport it back to liver. So this is question number 5, and the question is, given below are the abnormal conditions related to blood circulation. Name the disorders. And first part is acute chest pain due to uh, failure of oxygen supply to heart muscles, and the second one is increased systolic pressure. Let's look at the answer in details. So for the first condition, that is acute chest pain due to lack of oxygen supply to the heart muscle, the disorder is called as angina, or more specifically angina pectoris. So remember, this is a medical term. You might hear if someone is experiencing chest pain related to heart problems. Let's break that down a bit more. That angina is actually a symptom, that not it is not a disease itself. So it means that the heart muscles isn't getting enough oxygen, which causes that sudden sharp chest pain. So think of it like a warning sign, or we can say an important sign to take care of the of heart. So it's also important to know that angina can happen to anyone, but it's more common in middle aged and older adults. So this is because as we age, our blood vessels can become narrower or less flexible, and making it will make harder for oxygen rich blood to reach the heart. So conditions that affect blood flow, like high blood pressure, also called as hypertension, can lead to angina. So we will continue the solution. Let's talk about increased systolic pressure. So the medical term for this is high blood pressure, or we can say hypertension. Emphasize that hypertension means the blood pressure is higher than the normal value, which is usually 120 by 80. So in this measurement, the first number, that is 120, is called systolic pressure. And this is the pressure when the heart pumps blood out. The second one is 80, that is the diastolic pressure. It is when the heart is resting between beats. So when systolic pressure increases, for example, to 140 over 80 or 150 over 80, it indicates hypertension. This means the heart is working harder than normal to pump blood. So, high blood pressure doesn't just affect the heart, it can also damage other important organs like blood and kidneys. So, over the time, this can lead to serious health problems, just like how constant high pressure in a pipe can eventually cause leaks or bursts. So, this is question number 6, and the question asks, which coronary disease is caused due to narrowing of lumen of arteries? Let's see the answer in detail. So the answer here is atherosclerosis. Let's focus on this term. Atherosclerosis is the disease where the arteries become narrow, making it harder for blood to flow. So you can imagine the arteries are like water pipes, and if the inside of the pipe gets clogged with some stuff, then less water can get out through. So in our bodies, this means less blood reaches the heart muscle. Now let's see what causes this narrowing. It's mainly due to buildup of substances like calcium, fat, cholesterol, and fibrous tissue inside the artery walls. So think of it like a pipe getting clogged with debris over time, and this buildup blocks the vessels that supply blood to the heart, which can lead to chest pain or even heart attack. To sum up, atherosclerosis is a main cause of heart disease because it narrows the arteries and restricts blood flow to the heart. Remember, keeping our arteries healthy is important for overall heart health. So let's move to the next part or next question. So this is question number 1 of short answer type question, and the question is, the walls of ventricles are much thicker than atria. Explain. Let's look at the answer. So first let's consider how the hearts of different animals like fishes, reptiles, birds, and mammals have evolved. So each group shows unique features in their heart structure that help them survive in their environment. So notice how evolution shaped the organs to fit the needs of the organism, just like how tools are designed for specific tasks. So, one important evolutionary feature is that the walls of the ventricles are much thicker than those of the atria. So, these differences are not random. It's a it's a result of different jobs these chambers have. Think of the ventricles as the main engines of the heart, needing more strength to do their work. So the ventricles need thick walls because they are responsible for pumping blood out to the entire body, and they must do this with enough pressure to reach even the farthest cells. So imagine trying to water a garden with a hose. The farther you want the water to go, the more pressure you need. So the atria, on the other hand, only need to push blood a short distance to ventricles, so their walls are thinner. So here is an image showing structure of heart. Here notice how the walls of ventricles are visibly thicker than those of the atria. So we will continue the question. So first notice that the left ventricle has walls about 3 times thicker than the right ventricle. So atria on the other hand act mainly as collecting chambers for blood coming into the heart. So they don't need to be as strong, just like waiting room doesn't need to be as sturdy as a gym. The atria's thin walls are enough for to do this job. Also the atria also need to not only need to push blood down into the ventricles which are which are right below them. So this is a short easy journey for the blood, so atria don't need much force, and that's why their walls are thin. It's like pouring water from cup into a bowl sitting just below it. No extra strength here is needed. So this picture here you can see the walls of ventricles, how much they are thicker than the walls of atria. To sum up, the main reason the ventricles have thicker walls is because they need to generate more force to pump blood out of the heart, while the atria only need to move blood a short distance. So remember, structure always matches function in biology. So keeping in this in mind, let's move to the next question. And this question is about differences. We have to differentiate between blood and lymph, basophil and eosinophil, tricuspid and bicuspid valve. For example, if we talk about blood and lymph, they both are body fluids, but blood is like the main highway carrying oxygen, nutrients and waste, while lymph is more like a side road that helps drain excess fluid and fights infection. So talking about basophil and eosinophil, they are both types of WBCs, but they have different jobs in defending our system. Finally, tricuspid and bicuspid valves are like doors in the heart that control blood flow between chambers, but they are formed on different sides and have different number of flaps. Let's see the answer in detail. So here you can see that blood is like the main delivery system in our body, carrying oxygen, nutrients, and cells like RBCs, white blood cells, and platelets through all our blood vessels. Lymph, on the other hand, is more like a cleanup crew, moving mainly white blood cells through lymphatic system and helping to remove waste and fight infections. Here, notice that blood contains RBCs while lymph doesn't, and each flows in its own set of vessels. Like talking about blood, it flows in blood vessels, and talking about lymph, it flows only in lymphatic system and is found in majorly in extracellular, it majorly found extracellularly inside the tissue. So let's talk about the differences between basophil and eosinophil. So basophil have three lobes nucleus and fewer and coarser granules, while eosinophil has two lobed nucleus with more noticeable granules in their cytoplasm. So basophils are stained by basic dyes and eosinophil are stained by acidic dyes. Imagine them as preferring different colored uniforms. So talking about basophil, they are rare in the blood, making up to 0 to 1%, which while eosinophil are a bit more common and about they are present about 1 to 6% in the body fluid in the blood. So these differences help scientists identify them under microscope and understand their roles in fighting infections and allergies. Talking about bicuspid and tricuspid valves, tricuspid valve separate the right atria from the left right ventricle, whereas bicuspid valve separate the left atria from the left ventricle. Tricuspid, the name suggests, it is made up of three cusps or flaps. Bicuspid, as the name suggests, it has two cusps or two valves. Tricuspid valves also called as right atrioventricular valve, while bicuspid valve is also known as mitral valve, or we can say left atrioventricular valve. Now this is question number 3. The question asks us to briefly describe terms like anemia, angina pectoris, atherosclerosis, hypertension, heart failure, and erythroblastosis fetalis. Let's talk about each of them in detail. Talking about anemia, anemia is a decrease in the number of RBCs than the normal amount, and it is due to less quantity of hemoglobin than the normal value in the blood. This is very common disorder of the blood. Then angina common, also known as scientifically we call this angina pectoris. So it occurs when there is a blockage in coronary artery, thus insufficient supply of blood reaches to the heart muscles. So when someone has angina, they often experience symptoms like chest pain, fear, anxiety, pale skin, heavy sweating, and sometimes vomiting. So these are body's warning signals that heart isn't getting enough oxygen. So it's time to recognize these. So it's important to recognize these symptoms quickly, as they can signal serious problem. The pain from angina usually starts in the center of the chest and can spread down the left arm. So it typically lasts only a few seconds. The spreading pain is a classic sign, and it's a body's way of alerting us the heart is under stress, much like a warning light on a car dashboard. So we will continue this answer. Let's talk about atherosclerosis. So this is when cholesterol builds up inside the walls of our arteries, forming what we call as atherosclerotic plaques. So you can imagine it like a pipe in our house getting clogged with grease over time, making it harder for water, or in this case, blood to flow smoothly. Sometimes these plaques can block the arteries completely. When that happens, it can stop blood from reaching important organs like heart or brain, leading to heart attack or stroke. It's bit like a traffic jam that blocks all the cars from getting through. Now let's talk about hypertension, which is commonly known as atrial hypertension. This simply means high blood pressure in the arteries. Think of it as the pressure in the garden hose being too high, which can stain the hose and cause problems over time. So in hypertension, the blood pressure inside the arteries is higher than normal. This extra pressure puts stress on the walls of arteries, just like too much water pressure can damage a hose. So it could be primary hypertension, which has no obvious medical reason, but secondary hypertension are caused by various conditions which affect kidneys, arteries, heart, or endocrine system. Now let's look at heart failure, which is E. This is when the heart can't pump blood well enough to meet the body's need. Imagine the heart as a pump, then this is and that it isn't enough to push water through all the pipes in a building. Some areas won't get enough water, or in this case is blood. So we will continue the answer. F is erythroblastosis fetalis. This is a condition in newborns when their RBCs are destroyed by antibodies from the mother. So imagine the mother's immune system acts as a security guard that mistakenly attacks baby's RBCs, leading to anemia and increase in immature RBCs called reticulocytes. This can make the baby very sick if not treated. Notice that erythroblastosis fetalis develops because of Rh incompatibility between the parents. So think of Rh factor as special batch on RBCs. If mother don't have this batch, that is Rh negative, and the father does, that is Rh positive, problems can arise if the baby inherits the father's batch. So this mismatch can trigger mother's immune response. So in a man with Rh positive blood and woman with Rh negative the second pregnancy fetus may have this problem due to IgG accumulation in human during first child development and delivery. So that wraps up our explanation of erythroblastosis fetalis. Remember, understanding these conditions helps us appreciate how delicate the balance is in our circulatory system. So this is question number 4 of short answer type, and the question is, explain the advantage of having a complete partition in the ventricle, which leads to double circulation. Let's see the answer in detail. So if we briefly talk about this, the complete partition of ventricle in birds and mammals means that oxygen-rich blood and oxygen-poor blood never mix. So this is like having two separate pipelines, one for fresh water and one for wastewater. So each system works efficiently. Double circulation allows the body to deliver more oxygen to tissues, which is especially important for warm-blooded animals that needs lot of energy to maintain their body temperature, and this adaptation helps birds and mammals stay active and survive in wide range of environment. First, notice that birds and mammals have more advanced heart structure compared to other animals. This evolutionary improvement means their hearts are better at supporting their active lifestyles. It's like upgrading from a basic car engine to high performance car. So these animals need more oxygen because they live on land and often were very active. For example, birds do fly, mammals run or hunt, which require a lot of energy. So their bodies have adapted to deliver more oxygen to their tissues efficiently. In birds, the left auricle or atrium receives oxygenated blood from the lungs, while the right auricle gets deoxygenated blood from the body. This separation is crucial. Think of it like having two separate pipelines, one for clean water and one for waste, so they never mix. So as the blood moves to the into left and right ventricles, the separation continues, and oxygen rich and oxygen poor blood never mix. This ensures that only fully oxygenated blood is sent to the body, which is more efficient for delivering energy. So imagine if your clean and dirty laundry were always kept in separate baskets. So it seemed more organized. So you can see the structure of heart. It This is structure of heart of bird or mammal. You can see atrioventricular septum separating right ventricle and left ventricle. You can see pulmonary trunk and aorta. So notice here, the ventricles pump oxygenated and deoxygenated blood without mixing. This is like having two separate pipelines. One is carrying fresh water, and the other is carrying wastewater, so that they can never be mixed up. So this separation ensures our body tissues always get the maximum amount of oxygen possible. Thus, two separate circulatory pathways are found. Thus, this type of blood circulation is called as double circulation, which includes both systemic as well as pulmonary circulation. Here is a diagram to show double circulation. Notice here how heart acts as a central hub, directing blood along two separate routes. Okay, so we have already talked about this picture. So this is question number 5th of short answer type, and the question is, what is the significance of hepatic portal system in the circulatory system? Let's see the answer. If we talk briefly about it, the hepatic portal system acts like a checkpoint for blood coming from the digestive organs. It directs nutrient rich blood from the intestines straight to the liver before it goes to rest part of the body. So this allows the liver to process nutrients, detoxify harmful substances, and store important molecules. Think of it as a quality control center, making sure only safe and useful substances enter the blood mainstream. So, talking about hepatic portal system, this term might sound complex, but it's simply a network of blood vessels that connect two important organs. So, imagine it as dedicated highway that links the digestive tract directly to liver, ensuring that everything absorbed from our food goes to the liver first. Notice here that this system is present in all chordates, which includes humans and many other animals. The hepatic portal system here carries blood from the intestine straight to the liver before it joins the rest of the body's circulation. So it's like a security checkpoint where liver introspects and process everything coming from the digestive tract. This step emphasizes that the blood doesn't go straight from the intestine to the rest of the body. Instead, it passes through the liver. So this detour is crucial because the liver acts as a processing center, making sure that the nutrients and other substances are handled properly before they circulate throughout the body. So let's focus on why this system is so important. The hepatic portal system plays several vital roles in our circulatory system, which will be discussed in in below. So talking about the first point, when blood comes from alimentary canal, it carries nutrients like glucose, amino acids. Okay, so the liver absorbs any excess fats and glucose, storing them for times when the body might need extra energy, such as during fasting or starvation. So think of the liver as pantry, storing supplies for when they are mostly needed. Talking about second point, the liver helps detoxify the blood. So harmful nitrogenous waste like ammonia are converted into urea in the liver, and urea is less toxic and can be safely transported in the blood to the kidneys, where it removed from the body. So this is like turning dangerous chemicals into safe waste before taking out the trash. Now talking about third point, the liver produces important proteins that are released into the blood. For example, it makes fibrinogen, which is essential for blood clotting. This means that the liver not only processes nutrients and waste but also helps the body respond to injuries by making sure blood can clot when needed. To sum up, we can say that the hepatic portal system is essential for nutrient management, detoxification, and protein production. It ensures that everything absorbed from our body food is properly processed before entering the mainstream. So remember, the liver acts both as filter and factory, keeping our internal environment stable and healthy. So this is first question of long answer type, and question is about RH incompatibility. Let's see the answer in detail. So let's talk about Rh antigen. This is a special protein found on the surface of RBCs in most people, about 80% of the population. So you can think of the of it that antigen like a name tag on the cell, helping the body recognize its own cell. Emphasize that this is a majority trait, but not universal. So people who have this Rh antigen are called Rh positive, while those who don't have it are called as Rh negative. So it's similar to how we classify people by blood type like A, B, AB, or O. But this is a separate marker. So Rh positive means the antigen is present, and Rh negative means simply it's absent. So it's important to note that both Rh positive and Rh negative individuals are healthy and normal in everyday life. The presence or absence of Rh antigen doesn't affect how a person feels or functions under certain circumstances. So it's only in certain situations that the difference becomes important. The real issue with Rh differences comes up during blood transfusion and pregnancy. So these are the times when mixing Rh positive and Rh negative blood can cause problems. So we will see how. So let's talk about incompatibility during blood transfusion. So imagine two people, one with Rh positive blood and one with Rh negative blood. The Rh factor is like a special marker on RBCs, and not everyone have it. So this difference can cause issues if blood is transferred from one person to another. The first blood transfusion of Rh positive blood to a person with Rh negative blood causes no harm, because negative person develops anti Rh factors or antibodies in his or her blood. But during second transfusion of Rh positive blood to same Rh negative blood, those antibodies are ready and waiting. So they attack the donor's RBCs, which can lead to dangerous reaction. So it's similar to how our immune system remembers a virus and respond more strongly next time it appears. Talking about incompatibility during pregnancy, if the father's blood is Rh positive and the mother's blood is Rh negative, and the fetus inherits Rh positive type, this sets up potential conflict. The mother's body may see the fetus RBC's positive blood as foreign, which can be risky for the baby, especially in later pregnancies. However, during the first pregnancies, the Rh antigens from fetus usually don't mix up with the mother's blood because the placenta here acts like a barrier. So it's like having a wall uh, that keeps the two blood supplies separate, so the mother's immune system doesn't get exposed to Rh marker right away. Now let's see what happens in subsequent pregnancies. If Rh negative mother has already been exposed to Rh positive blood, her immune system remembers it and produces anti-Rh antibodies in later pregnancies. With another Rh positive baby, these antibodies can cross the placenta and attacks the baby's RBC, almost like mother's immune system is mistakenly treating the baby cells as invaders. So this immune attack leads to condition called as hemolytic disease of the newborn, or you can say HDN, which is commonly known as erythroblastosis fetalis. Think of it as the baby's RBC's cells being destroyed faster than they can be made, which can cause serious health problems for the newborn. So it's like baby's body is under attack from within, all because of its blood group incompatibility. So this is the diagram. Here you can see what happens during first pregnancy, because baby's blood and mother's bloods are completely separated. So this is the case of erythroblastosis fetalis. First, let's see what happened to the newborn. Like in some cases, the baby may survive but will be anemic, which means they have fewer RBCs than the normal, and may also suffer from jaundice where the skin and eyes turn yellow. So think of anemia as the body here not having enough delivery trucks like RBCs to carry oxygen, and jaundice as traffic jam caused by too much or too many bilirubin in the blood. So these are the signs that the baby's body is struggling because of Rh incompatibility. Now let's talk about prevention. If the question is, can it be prevented? Of course it this can be prevented. So this condition can actually be avoided by giving the mother anti-Rh antibodies right after the delivery of her first child. So these antibodies act like security guards, removing any Rh positive cells from mother's blood before her immune system can react to them. So this simple step helps protect future pregnancies from further complications that we have discussed above. So this is the whole picture of how of the condition erythroblastosis fetalis. Here we have learned that it is caused when Rh negative mother when Rh negative mother conceive positive fetus, and due to their Rh incompatibility in later on pregnancies, it may cause problem to fetus. So we it can be avoided. How it can be avoided? It can be avoided by anti Rh antibodies. When it can be it can it will when it given to the mothers after just after the first delivery, then we can avoid this condition, which is known as erythroblastosis fetalis. Thank you so much, students, for listening. I hope you like this session.